This is the Atari 2600 video computer system. Released in 1977, the Atari 2600 was the most popular home video game console of its generation. Many units like this one still remain in the collection of video gamers today who grew up in the 1970s and 80s and still cherish their Atari 2600. The unit was large and cumbersome, but came with an attractive and stylish wood grain finish, something that modern video game consoles have sadly abandoned. The Atari 2600 came with its trademark single button, single joystick controller, which plugged into controller ports on the back of the unit, which was a very interesting choice. Presumably you'd lay on the ground or sit this in front of your television and run the controller wires from the back to the front. And they didn't give you very much wire to play with, so typically we just lay in front of the TV back in the day and play the Atari 2600. Had 6 buttons on the front here of the heavy 6er unit. The on and off switch, TV type, color, black and white. You had your difficulty switch for A and B, making it easier and harder. Game cartridges like Space Cavern plug right into the front here. Instant load times, thanks to the lack of disk drives. By the fall of 2000, the video game industry had expanded into a multi-billion-dollar global empire. The PlayStation 2 was released in October of that year. The original PS2 is about the same size and weight as the original Atari 2600 and shares some of the same design cues. The ridges in the front of the PS2, in my opinion, show a nod of appreciation towards the design of the Atari 2600. Because just like potato chips, ridges make it better. With over 125 million PlayStation 2s sold worldwide, the PS2 is regarded by many as the leading video game console of its generation. The PlayStation 2 and the Atari 2600 both had very long lifespans, and throughout the years that they were being produced, improvements were made in manufacturing to reduce the size of the units and also to reduce the cost. And that brings us to the Atari 2600 Junior and the PlayStation 2 Slim. Both much, much smaller and lighter than their big brothers. Just look how tiny the PlayStation 2 Slim is compared to the original PlayStation 2. Yet they still managed to get all the same memory card and controller ports in the front. And instead of having the disk drive pop open like it does on the original, you simply open the top of it and there's where your video game goes. So this thing is essentially nothing more than just a tiny disk drive with some controller ports. It's pretty incredible. The back of the PS2 Slim is more or less the same as well, with an Ethernet port, optical audio output, and the audio and video output is the same. Notice how big the fan on the original PS2 is, and well, this thing's nice and slim and doesn't have one. One of the reasons they were able to reduce the size of the PlayStation 2 as much as they did is they moved the power supply outboard. I'm a huge fan of outboard power supplies because you can just toss them behind your equipment rack and never see them again. And it really reduces the size of the unit, so it frees up space on your rack so that you can have multiple game systems, like the PS2, Atari 2600, Sega Dreamcast, NES, you need them all. The Atari 2600 Junior was released in 1986 and is more or less the same as its big brother. Has the buttons on the front for reset, game select, black and white and color television, and the on and off switch. Cartridge slot is exactly the same. And note that when you put the game cartridge in, it almost overpowers the entire console. That's how much smaller they made the Atari 2600 Junior. Especially when it's such a massively awesome game cartridge like Vanguard. The back of the unit is pretty similar as well. They've kept the controller ports on the rear, which is unfortunate. I prefer the controller ports on the front like they've done with the Atari 7800. This uses an outboard power supply like the original Atari 2600 and also the PlayStation 2 Slim. Nothing will ever replace the style and sophistication of the original wood-grained Atari 2600. But the Atari 2600 Junior is a nice addition to the Atari family. It's light as a feather, it's tiny, it's a newer game console, so today if you're collecting them, there's a better chance of you finding one that works well. From an aesthetic design standpoint, both the Atari 2600 and the PlayStation 2 Slim are excellent, good-looking systems, but from a functionality standpoint, the PS2 console comes out slightly ahead. I'll explain. If you're playing Gran Turismo 4, for instance, and doing one of the endurance races, you can simply put the game in like that and shut the lid. Now, if you want to grab a beer, this thing can easily double as a drink coaster while you're playing the game. The Atari 2600, it's a little more cumbersome because you put the cartridge in and then there's no easy place to put your beverage. Point for the PlayStation 2 right there. One of the features that the Atari 2600 Junior has that the PlayStation 2 Slim does not is this handy reflector strip on the front of the unit. If you're walking home from a friend's place after a night of Atari 2600 video gaming, other cars can see this reflective strip several blocks away and will not run over you. This is a life-saving safety feature that should be mandatory on all video game consoles. Chalk up 1 point to Atari. If anything shows the popularity and staying power of the PlayStation 2 and the Atari 2600, it's that years after these consoles were developed, brand new video games are still being released for both systems, like Williams Pinball on the PlayStation 2 and Actionauts on the Atari 2600. So which game console should you purchase, the Atari 2600 Junior or the PlayStation 2 Slim? Well, there's no question about it, this is a dead tie. Because if you want to play games like Berserk, you've got to have the Atari 2600. If you want to play Gradius 5, Gran Turismo 4, you've got to have the PlayStation 2. In their new slim forms, both the Atari 2600 Junior and the PlayStation 2 Slim are the most cost-effective and convenient ways to have these consoles. In fact, both of them together are about the same size as the original PlayStation 2. Therefore, even though the Atari 2600 has a higher number than the PlayStation 2, I consider both of these game consoles to be equal. With a seemingly unlimited supply of exclusive titles to play on both the Atari 2600 and PlayStation 2, you'll simply never get bored with any of these consoles. There's just simply too many games to choose from, especially considering that the PlayStation 2 plays PS1 and PS2 games. The only possible negative I can think of is that your Yar's Revenge cartridge will not play in the PS2, and your Gran Turismo 4 disc won't play in the Atari 2600. PS2 and Atari 2600. Together, they equal the PlayStation Atari 2602. The Atari 2600 Junior is light as a feather, yet packs a powerful, enormous punch. Rawr.